Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive.
Sorry to be here.
Today, we're really plunging into some of humanity's most enduring and, let's face it, often polarizing questions.
Absolutely, yeah. The big ones.
Yeah, particularly those brought right to the forefront by thinkers like Richard Dawkins and, the whole new atheist movement. We're going to grapple with this idea that the very existence of God is, well, a delusion. And with that, maybe the whole scaffolding for morality and meaning crumbles too.
It's a powerful critique.
Can one be truly good without God? Is faith inherently irrational, like a retreat from reason? And how has faith, throughout history sometimes been used to justify ignorance, maybe even violence, turning away from empirical truth, fostering conflict? It's heavy stuff.
These are definitely challenging inquiries, and our mission in this deep dive, it isn't really to take sides, defend or attack any specific viewpoint.
Right.
Instead, we're taking these critiques, the kind you find really sharply articulated in books like The God Delusion. We're taking them seriously.
Using them as a lens, almost.
Exactly. As a lens to refine our own understanding, to truly confront the complexities of belief and disbelief, too, and just explore this incredibly rich and, sometimes troubling landscape of spiritual and ethical life. By engaging with these powerful arguments against religion, the hope is we emerge with a more nuanced, maybe more robust understanding of these fundamental questions.
Absolutely. And our guiding questions today, they really cut to the heart of what it means to be human, doesn't it? To seek purpose, define morality in this complex world.
Totally.
We'll be drawing from, a truly diverse stack of sources. It's like a tapestry woven from ancient scriptures, the Common English Bible, the Torah, the Quran.
And then philosophical texts like the Upanishads, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations.
Yeah, and then diving into modern psychological and spiritual works too. Insights from Eckhart Tolle, Brené Brown, Viktor Frankl, so many others.
It's quite the list.
The goal here is really to stitch together these, myriad perspectives, draw out surprising insights, connections that maybe challenge our assumptions, and just deepen our collective understanding. So let's get ready to think, to question, and hopefully to really understand.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's unpack this first fundamental question. The idea that morality somehow requires a divine source, or conversely, that goodness can, stand entirely on its own. It's a foundational debate, right? And it's particularly sharpened by those critiques arguing religion is the only basis for ethics. So what do our sources tell us about the very foundations of ethical living, whether divinely inspired or maybe intrinsically human?
Well, this is where the complexity truly kicks in, because just defining good and morality,
Right.
It's not straightforward at all.
Right. Different meanings for different people, different traditions.
Exactly. Different traditions approach it from fundamentally different angles, even when their conclusions about, say, ethical behavior might seem similar on the surface. We see a pretty clear distinction, for instance, in how monotheistic traditions often tie morality directly to the divine, usually through explicit commands and the consequences, of observing or transgressing them.
So a direct, clear-cut framework, almost like a divine law book, you could say. That feels very immediate, very tangible for a lot of people.
It absolutely does. If you take, for example, the Common English Bible, we encounter that narrative of Nadab and Abihu.
Oh yeah, the unauthorized fire.
Right. They're dramatically punished for offering unauthorized fire before the Lord.
Yeah.
And their transgression, it isn't just framed as a procedural error, It's a direct, profound violation of a divine command, and it leads to immediate, severe consequences. So that really highlights a moral universe where disobedience isn't just wrong in an abstract sense. It carries, existential weight. Similarly, the Achan's transgression, remember, where he takes items reserved for God after a battle.
Right, spoils of war he wasn't supposed to touch.
Exactly. That brings wrath upon the entire community of Israel, not just himself. So here, individual moral failure has this devastating ripple effect on the collective.
Wow. So the stakes aren't just personal, they're communal, tying the fate of the many to the actions of the one.
Precisely.
And this divine sanction for moral behavior, or, the lack of it, does that extend to leadership as well, kings and rulers?
Oh, definitely. In the narrative of King Solomon, his continued kingship, the stability of Israel itself, it's explicitly conditional on him observing God's commands and regulations.
Okay.
Turning away from these leads directly to disaster. So the connection between obedience to divine law and well-being, both personal and societal, it's crystal clear. Even Abraham in the Torah faces divine intervention when he tells Abimelech that Sarah is his sister. Remember that story? It leads to a near calamity for Abimelech's household.
Right. God steps in.
God steps in. And while Abraham's action isn't directly punished by God in that instance, The episode illuminates how divine will operates, sometimes through intervention, to uphold a kind of moral order, even when human choices introduce ambiguity or, frankly, deception.
And there are also those direct commands for what we might call, foundational social good, like the instruction in the Torah to leave them gleanings for the poor and for the stranger.
Yes, exactly. That's a very clear, divinely mandated act of charity. It shows a compassionate side to this divine law.
So, moving to the Quran, do we find a similar emphasis there on righteous deeds and accountability?
We do, but perhaps with the stronger focus on individual agency and the inherent benefit of moral action. It explicitly states God is not unjust towards his creatures, which implies an inherent moral order that's fundamentally just and equitable. And this connects goodness directly to personal exertion. Whoso exerts himself does so for his own benefit, and God has no need of mankind. The scripture promises remission for sinful deeds and reward for the best of their acts, for those who believe and perform righteous deeds.
So it's not merely about following rules to avoid punishment then. It's more like actively striving for goodness, which then intrinsically benefits the individual. There's a strong sense of personal responsibility there, a direct correlation between effort and outcome.
That's a crucial distinction, I think. There's this powerful thread of personal accountability, where one's deeds are directly linked to one's spiritual and ultimate well-being. The Quran also warns against those who are miserly with what God has bestowed upon them, stating they shall be shackled by it on the day of resurrection. That's a powerful image of internal consequence.
Yeah, definitely.
And the verse, the impure is not like the pure, even though you are impressed by the abundant wealth of the impure. That reinforces a moral distinction that goes beyond just material success.
Right. It emphasizes an inherent moral quality that exists independent of, outward appearance or how much money someone has.
Exactly. An intrinsic quality.
What about Christian thought on this? I'm thinking of someone like C.S. Lewis. He often seems to ground morality very firmly in God's nature itself.
Yes, C.S. Lewis, especially in Mere Christianity, describes God's desire not just for obedience, but for creatures of a certain kind or quality.
Interesting.
This suggests that goodness isn't just about external actions that conform to a rule, but about cultivating an inherent virtuous nature that aligns with God's own being. It's about an internal transformation towards a divine likeness.
So less about rule following, more about becoming something.
In a sense, yes. Similarly, the Theologia Germanica, which is this profound mystical text, articulates it beautifully. It states that for the enlightened soul, there is no longer anything willed or loved but that which is good, because it is good, and for no other reason than that it is good. It goes even further, saying, God loveth not himself, but as goodness. This portrays goodness as this intrinsic quality, part of the divine nature itself. So to love goodness is, in essence, to align with the divine.
That's a powerful idea, loving goodness for goodness' sake, not just because God commands it, but because it is inherently good, and that goodness reflects something divine.
Exactly. And this notion gets reinforced in the Divine Conspiracy Continued, which states that moral goodness is so crucial to God's pursuit of world transformation.
Okay.
So it frames ethical living not just as personal salvation, but as integral to a larger divine project for the world, like a co-creative act of bringing about a more just and loving reality.
Okay. So we've explored how a divine framework can provide a very direct, often very compelling basis for morality, with clear commands, consequences for many traditions.
Right, a strong foundation for many.
But this raises that pivotal question, doesn't it? The one that critics like Dawkins would immediately jump on. Can goodness truly flourish and be consistently defined without that explicit divine lawgiver? Because here's where it gets really interesting, I think. As we look at traditions and contemporary thought that offer these compelling frameworks for virtue and ethical living from a profoundly different starting point, often without needing a personal God at all.
Yeah.
So what do our sources reveal from these, let's call them secular and non-theistic perspectives? Where does goodness truly come from, according to them?
And this highlights a very different starting point, doesn't it? Emphasizing maybe intrinsic human capacities or alignment with a natural order. Take Taoism, for instance. It's a philosophical system that offers this really profound framework for ethical living, entirely independent of a personal interventionist God.
All right.
Zhuangzi, one of its most influential philosophers back in the 4th century BCE, taught that an individual's life should be in alignment with, not in opposition to, nature and the Tao.
The Tao, the way.
Exactly. This isn't about commandments from on high. It's about a deep, maybe intuitive understanding of the natural order of the universe and living in harmony with its rhythms. It's aiming for a kind of spontaneous, unforced goodness that emerges when one ceases to strive against the flow of existence.
So less effort, more flow.
Kind of. And this understanding isn't just intellectual, it's cultivated experientially. Taoist meditation practices, by fostering harmony with the Tao, often through focusing on the breath, achieving stillness, they're explicitly aimed at this internal alignment, which then leads to an ethical life that flows naturally without relying on divine edicts or external rules.
So it's about flowing with the universe, finding an inherent wisdom in nature rather than following a command book. That's a really profound shift in perspective.
It is.
And what about Buddhism? The Dhammapada, for example, seems to offer quite direct moral guidelines, but without a traditional concept of God as the source.
It does. The Dhammapada offers these clear ethical principles that feel quite universal in their applicability. Let one tell the truth. Let one not be angry. Ask. Let one give, even when he has but little.
Very practical.
Very practical, actionable guidelines for compassionate living. But they aren't presented as divine commands from a specific deity. Instead, they're framed as paths to wisdom and ultimately liberation from suffering. The text also speaks of a learned one as being secure, without enmity, without fear, emphasizing an internal state of peace and ethical conduct achieved through wisdom, not through external authority.
Okay.
And Pia Kadran, in When Things Fall Apart, discusses prajna, that key Buddhist concept, often translated as profound wisdom or insight, as shedding defenses, and how actions then become a means of putting down burdens. This points to an internal experiential basis for ethical conduct rooted in a deeper, enlightened awareness that arises from within.
That's a very internal, almost psychological approach to goodness, isn't it? Focusing on the transformation of the self rather than just adherence to external rules. Shifting gears a bit, what about Stoicism? Marcus Aurelius always strikes me as someone deeply ethical, but his context feels more philosophical than overtly religious in the way we've been discussing.
Right. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, certainly exemplifies an ethical framework rooted in reason and acceptance of the natural order. He focuses on a mind entirely conformed and resigned to God, the great governor of this city.
He uses the word God there, but...
He does use God, but it often seems to refer more to a rational, providential universe or an intelligent force, rather than a personal deity in the monotheistic sense. The emphasis is really on the individual's mind and reason in aligning with this providential natural order.
Okay.
Hutcheson's endorsement of Marcus's maxim, love and desire that alone which happens to you, and is destined by providence for you, for what can be more suitable. That further highlights this idea of acceptance. Aligning with this natural order is a path to virtue and inner peace, cultivating an equanimity that's entirely within one's own rational control.
So, whether there's a personal God or not, it's about the rational acceptance of what is and finding your place in it through inner fortitude. That makes sense. Now, what about contemporary views? Modern psychology often looks at human behavior and morality without invoking the divine at all, yet it still provides frameworks for what constitutes good behavior.
Oh, absolutely. And it offers compelling insights into the intrinsic drivers of ethical behavior.
Yeah.
Brené Brown's research, for example, explored in works like Daring Greatly and The Gifts of Imperfection.
Yeah, hugely popular.
It links inner states like shame, vulnerability, and worthiness to outward behaviors, often self-destructive ones. Her work suggests deep psychological roots for morality, emphasizing how courage, vulnerability, and shame resilience are crucial for authentic living and for fostering genuine connection with others. This is an entirely human-centered approach, focusing on our emotional and relational intelligence.
And Steven Pinker's work comes to mind, too, with his focus on self-control as a cornerstone for a flourishing life. That feels relevant here.
Absolutely. Steven Pinker, in The Better Angels of Our Nature, discusses how self-control correlates strongly with a healthy and successful life and fewer negative behaviors.
Yeah.
He argues it's a fundamental pro-social trait.
He talks about the marshmallow test, right?
Yeah, he references the famous marshmallow test, where children's ability to delay gratification is a strong predictor of later success and well-being. And also self-rating sentences, where adults assess their own self-control. This provides a kind of data-driven argument for an intrinsic human capacity for goodness and self-regulation. It demonstrates that positive traits can be cultivated through secular means, offering a biological and psychological basis for ethical conduct.
Okay, so what does this all mean when we put it all together? It's quite a spectrum. We've looked at traditions that explicitly link goodness to God,
divine command.
and others, including ancient philosophies and modern psychology, that suggest inherent human capacities for ethical behavior, self-regulation, or, alignment with the natural order. What's the core insight here pulling these threads together?
What's truly fascinating, then, is that despite these radically different origins, from divine commandments and cosmic systems to evolutionary psychology and humanistic ethics, we see this profound convergence on what actually constitutes ethical behavior.
That is interesting.
It raises a compelling question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Are these universal moral intuitions somehow hardwired into the human experience, perhaps through evolution? Or are they reflections of a deeper, maybe even cosmic moral order that different traditions just articulate through their own cultural and theological lenses? Our sources suggest that while the why may vary wildly, the what of goodness often finds common ground. And they consistently emphasize the critical role of our inner state and intention. Conversations with God encapsulates this beautifully, I think. It states, motive is everything. Objectives determine outcomes. Life proceeds out of your intention. Your true intention is revealed in your actions, and your actions are determined by your true intention.
So the internal driver, not just the outward act, is paramount.
That seems to be the common thread. It's not just the action itself, but why you do it, the purity of intention that truly defines ethical living, whether that intention is seen as divinely inspired or internally cultivated.
That makes perfect sense.
And Deepak Chopra's law of karma also resonates with this, doesn't it? Asserting that by becoming a conscious choice maker, you begin to generate actions that are evolutionary for you and for those that are around you.
Right, conscious choice.
He even suggests using inner guidance, asking, if the choice feels comfortable, I will plunge ahead with abandon. If the choice feels uncomfortable, I will pause and see the consequences of my action with my inner vision. This highlights that regardless of the specific framework, divine law, natural order, psychological well-being, the intention and the conscious choice behind our actions, often guided by an internal sense of resonance or discomfort, seems central to ethical living and our moral journey. Which brings us neatly to another of our central questions, one that particularly fuels arguments against faith, like those Dawkins makes. Is faith, by its very nature, an abandonment of reason? Or are there perhaps different kinds of rationality, different ways of knowing that our sources might illuminate? This raises a really important question about what we even mean by reason and understanding.
That's a crucial point because critics often frame faith as, turning off your brain, taking things on blind trust. But I've always suspected there's more to it than just intellectual assent, that some forms of understanding go beyond purely intellectual thought, tapping into intuition, feeling, direct experience. What do our sources say about this broader spectrum of knowing?
Well, many spiritual traditions definitely highlight a mode of knowing that fundamentally transcends mere intellectual reasoning. Conversations with God states this very directly, really challenging our conventional understanding of truth.
How so?
It posits, the soul speaks to you in feelings. Listen to your feelings. Follow your feelings. Honor your feelings. Feelings are the language of the soul, and your soul is your truth. It even advises, true celebration is mindless, and urges us to get out of your mind, get back to your senses. This perspective fundamentally challenges purely intellectual approaches to discerning truth, suggesting that a deeper, maybe more embodied wisdom lies in our emotions and sensory experience.
That's a radical idea for many of us, I think, especially those trained to prioritize logic and mental deduction above everything else, to trust feelings as a path to truth, especially when our minds are so often busy trying to logically figure everything out.
It is radical. And Eckhart Tolle, in A New Earth and the Power of Now, describes something similar. He talks about how a brief cessation in the habitual stream of thinking can occur during moments of intense perception as consciousness gets diverted to sense perception.
Like being fully present.
Exactly. He suggests this interconnectedness frees one from the ego, which he links to a complete unawareness of the dimension of space. Tolle speaks of disidentifying from the pain body, that accumulation of past emotional pain, and taking a leap into the unknown. These are clearly non-intellectual, experiential processes aimed at a direct apprehension of reality beyond thought.
So it's about quieting that incessant mental chatter to access a deeper, more profound awareness. That sounds a lot like what Sam Harris talks about in Waking Up, doesn't it? Even though he comes from an explicitly secular, even atheist perspective.
It absolutely does. Harris discusses the selflessness of consciousness and describes meditation not as taking anything on faith, but as a means of getting more familiar with it, like an empirical exploration of inner experience.
Okay.
He views thoughts as transitory appearances in consciousness, and states that the dissolution or transcendence of the ego is nothing to fear. In fact, it is a prerequisite for making any spiritual progress. So his approach, while secular and deeply rooted in neuroscience, aligns with this idea that profound understanding and spiritual insight can come from an internal, non-conceptual shift in awareness, a direct experience of consciousness itself.
And William James, the father of American psychology, he had some groundbreaking things to say about these non-rational states too, didn't he? He observed them as legitimate forms of knowing, not just, delusions.
He certainly did.
Yeah.
James's observations on mystical states of consciousness are foundational here, particularly his argument that these experiences are authoritative over the individuals to whom they come.
Authoritative. Wow.
Yeah. He concluded that their very existence absolutely overthrows the pretension of non-mystical states to be the sole and ultimate dictators of what we may believe. He saw them not as mere aberrations, but as potentially indispensable stages in our approach to the final fullness of the truth, states where the opposites of the world melt into unity.
That provides a powerful early sort of scientific validation for experiential and intuitive ways of knowing. Seeing them as equally valid, maybe even more profound than purely rational ones, for certain aspects of reality.
Exactly. It's a huge validation for many spiritual paths, suggesting that a purely materialist or intellectual rationalism might be missing crucial dimensions of human experience.
And when you look at contemplative traditions, they seem to actively cultivate this non-intellectual approach, this way of knowing by unknowing, right?
Absolutely. The Cloud of Unknowing, that classic mystical text from the 14th century, directly encourages leaving all that thing that I can think and choose to my love that thing that I cannot think.
Love over thought, essentially. For why? He may well be loved, but not thought. By love may he be gotten and holden, but by thought, never. It's a quintessential mystical approach, prioritizing direct experience and loving apprehension over intellectual grasp or conceptual understanding. And St. John of the Cross, in Dark Night of the Soul, describes the dark night of sense as purgative contemplation. This process causes passively in the soul the negation of itself and of all things to attain to living the sweet and delectable life of love with God. It's portrayed as this rigorous journey beyond the senses and intellect to a deeper union, often marked by a sense of spiritual desolation that ultimately leads to profound insight.
It sounds like a real discipline, though. Not a mindless abandonment of thought, but maybe a focused redirection of attention.
Indeed. And the Philokalia, which is a collection of texts by spiritual masters from the Eastern Orthodox tradition, emphasizes self-restraint, dispassion, and the discipline of the flesh leading to blessed purity. It explicitly states that ignorance, a domineering spirit, and licentiousness govern the soul when intelligence is stupefied. It highlights that true understanding, a pure intelligence capable of perceiving divine truth, requires disciplined spiritual practice and ethical living, not intellectual laziness.
Okay, but then there's also the aspect of faith that does engage with logic, right? Or at least tries to frame divine concepts in a way that makes sense to the rational mind, even when grappling with paradoxes. How do our sources address logic and truth in relation to the divine, offering explanations that, while maybe outside conventional logic, are internally consistent?
This is where we see theologians and philosophers really grappling with apparent paradoxes, trying to bridge that gap between human understanding and divine mystery. C.S. Lewis, for example, famously addresses the classic problem of divine foreknowledge and human free will in Mere Christianity.
Ah, yes, the big one.
He poses the question directly. Everyone who believes in God at all believes that he knows what you and I are going to do tomorrow. But if he knows I'm going to do so-and-so, how can I be free to do otherwise?
It's a real conundrum, isn't it? A classic logical bind that has stumped so many.
Lewis offers a truly mind-bending solution, though. He proposes that God is outside and above the timeline. All the days are now for him.
Outside of time.
Yeah. Imagine, he suggests, looking at a line on a page representing time. You, on the page, only see the point you're at. But someone looking down on a whole page sees the entire line at once.
Okay.
God, Lewis suggests, isn't foreseeing your actions from a future point. Rather, he simply sees you doing them as if they are all happening simultaneously in his eternal now, because for him, all of time is a continuous present moment. This elegantly frames a theological paradox within a logical, albeit highly conceptual, framework. It attempts to reconcile apparent contradictions by redefining the very nature of divine existence in relation to time.
That's a sophisticated way to approach it, essentially redefining God's existence relative to time, to allow for both divine knowledge and human agency. Clever.
And another example of transcending ordinary human logic is found in the concept of the absolute in various traditions. The Upanishads, those ancient Hindu scriptures, describe Brahman, the ultimate reality, using contradictory terms. The shaped and the unshaped, the mortal and the immortal, the still and the moving, the present and the beyond.
Trying to capture something beyond
Right.
words.
Exactly. And it famously culminates with neti, neti, not this, not this. This isn't really a statement of negation in the simple sense, but an affirmation that Brahman fundamentally transcends all ordinary categories and definitions. It cannot be grasped or contained by conventional intellectual thought alone. It points to a reality that is beyond conceptualization.
It's almost like defining it by what it isn't, pushing the mind beyond its usual limits to apprehend something greater, like a logical negative space.
That's a good way to put it. And the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali speak of distinguishing between the individual spirit and the intelligence energy of material nature, and achieving total separation from the mundane psychology, a state known as kaivalya, or ultimate liberation. How? Through complete restraint of mento-emotional energy. This is a path to truth that's highly systematic and disciplined, but again, it's about a profound inner experience and transformation of consciousness, not just logical deduction. It also comes with a warning, interestingly, against the desire for fame as a spiritual master, which can cause a fall down, indicating an ethical dimension even in the pursuit of ultimate truth and liberation.
And finally, Ralph Waldo Emerson seems to bring in a different kind of truth altogether, doesn't he? One that's almost artistic, seeing truth embedded in beauty itself.
Yes, Ralph Waldo Emerson, in Emerson's essays, sees the poet as the sayer, the namer, the one who apprehends and articulates fundamental truths. He asserts that God has not made some beautiful things, but beauty is the creator of the universe.
Beauty as the creator.
Yeah. Therefore, he says, the poet is not any permissive potentate, but is emperor in his own right. He suggests that truth can also be perceived and expressed through inherent beauty and creative insight, an aesthetic form of understanding that is profound and fundamental, not merely intellectual. For Emerson, the poet accesses a deeper, intuitive truth about the cosmos.
Okay, so stepping back, what does this all mean for the concept of rationality itself? It really sounds like these perspectives collectively suggest that rationality can encompass much more than just empirical observation or linear logic. It seems to broaden our very definition of what it means to know.
Precisely. This deep dive reveals really diverse methodologies for perceiving truth and reality. Some are rooted in sensory and emotional experience, others in profound mystical insight, and some in a redefinition of fundamental concepts like time and existence through philosophical or theological reasoning. It profoundly broadens our understanding of what knowing truly entails. It suggests that different questions may require different forms of inquiry, and that to limit ourselves to just one form of rationality, say the purely scientific or intellectual, is to potentially miss vast dimensions of truth in human experience. It really challenges the premise that faith is inherently irrational by showcasing these alternative paths to understanding.
All right, now here's where it gets really interesting and frankly quite challenging, especially when we engage directly with critiques like those from Richard Dawkins and others. We have to talk about the shadow side of belief.
The difficult part.
Critics of religion often point quite forcefully to its history of violence and its tendency at times to foster ignorance. These are significant, grave challenges for any faith tradition. How do our sources acknowledge or reflect these darker aspects rather than just, sweeping them under the rug?
This is a crucial part of any impartial examination, isn't it? We have to acknowledge the gravity of these critiques because the source material itself often doesn't shy away from them. History, unfortunately, provides ample evidence of belief systems being co-opted for harmful ends, twisting potentially noble intentions into justifications for brutality.
And Joseph Campbell, in The Power of Myth, he really highlights some of the stark ethical contradictions you can find right within Scripture, doesn't he? These are exactly the kinds of passages that anti-theists often point to as deeply problematic.
He certainly does. Campbell discusses what he calls an ethical contradiction in Deuteronomy. He notes passages that state things like, "Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife except abroad, that you should put all males to the sword, and the women you shall take as booty to yourself."
Wow, that's blunt.
It's incredibly blunt, and it's a stark example of how, within a specific scriptural context, love and compassion are reserved for the in-group, and aggression and abuse are projected outward on others. It's a clear illustration of how a divinely sanctioned moral code can become highly conditional and tribal, fostering a dangerous us versus them mentality.
That's a really challenging passage to reconcile with any kind of universal ethic of compassion. And we see similarly harsh punitive actions described in other biblical texts, too, often invoked with divine authority, right?
Yes, in the Common English Bible, for instance, the story of Phinehas. He leads the Israelites in punitive actions and warns against rebellion, explicitly invoking the offense of Peor and Acham's crime as justifications for severe measures against the community. These accounts vividly demonstrate how perceived breaches of divine law or communal solidarity can lead to widespread, brutal consequences, often with a clear in-group, out-group dynamic where perceived outsiders or transgressors face severe retribution, all in the name of maintaining collective purity or divine favor.
And beyond Scripture, we have these powerful historical and personal accounts of violence and suffering tied to belief systems and territorial conflicts. Black Elk comes to mind immediately, a very visceral example of how deeply faith and cultural identity can intertwine with conflict.
That's a harrowing example of ethno-religious conflict, yes.
Yeah.
Black Elk recounts scalping a soldier for a younger boy, feeling happy and not sorry at all because, as he says, those Wasichus had come to kill our mothers and fathers and us, and it was our country.
Just raw justification.
It's a raw, personal account of religiously tinged conflict, where the violence is justified by existential threat and the defense of one's people, land, and spiritual way of life against an invading force. And the Battle of Little Beerhorn, mentioned in that context with varying casualty estimates, just underscores the historical reality of these violent clashes where differing beliefs, cultures, and claims to land led to immense suffering and loss on all sides.
And Viktor Frankl's experiences in Auschwitz. They put human-inflicted suffering on a scale that's almost unimaginable, highlighting the absolute depths of depravity humans can reach, often under the guise of some ideology or a pseudo-religious belief system.
Frankel's man's search for meaning provides this harrowing context for human-inflicted atrocity, people dying in gas chambers, systematically stripped of their humanity. While it's not directly about religious conflict per se, it underscores the extreme suffering humans can inflict when ideologies, even those twisted into a perverse kind of faith in racial purity or political doctrine, take precedence over basic human dignity. Frankel's focus, however, was on finding meaning amidst this atrocity, which is itself a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, even when confronted with the darkest acts of human evil.
James Baldwin, in The Fire Next Time, offers such a powerful critique of the Black church in America during the Civil Rights era. He speaks to a different kind of suffering and its complex, often contradictory relationship with faith during intense racial oppression.
Baldwin's reflections are incredibly insightful and deeply critical. He describes his frustration with the Black church, sometimes seeing it as a mask for hatred and self-hatred and despair.
Strong words.
Very strong. And its teachings of gentle Jesus as a way, in his view, to reconcile themselves to their misery on earth in order to gain the crown of eternal life. He questioned whether heaven was merely another ghetto for Negroes, expressing profound anger that the church at times seemed to foster resignation rather than active resistance to profound injustice. He explicitly reflects on the Negro's past of rope, fire, torture, castration, infanticide, rape, death, and humiliation, fear by day and night, acknowledging the immense suffering that faith in this context simultaneously sought to alleviate and, perhaps in his view, inadvertently perpetuate by encouraging passive endurance rather than demanding liberation.
So for Baldwin, religion could sometimes be seen almost like an opiate delaying necessary action and fostering a kind of ignorance about the true nature of their oppression.
That was his critique at times, yes.
But there's also the broader issue of faith fostering ignorance or actively resisting change and new knowledge, which is another common critique from a rationalist perspective, right? Like the creationism versus evolution debate, for example.
This tendency is well documented, even within religious texts themselves sometimes. The Quran itself mentions those who, when told to come to what God has revealed and to the messenger, retort. Sufficient for us is what we find our ancestors have followed.
Stick with tradition.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This directly illustrates a profound resistance to new guidance or truth based on an uncritical adherence to tradition, even if those ancestors, as the text notes, knew nothing and lived without guidance. It's a clear example of how unquestioning tradition or dogmatic ancestral worship can stifle intellectual and spiritual progress.
It's almost an anti-intellectual stance, isn't it, where the comfort of tradition trumps the pursuit of new understanding or revelation.
And C.S. Lewis, again with his ironic brilliance in the Screwtape Letters, offers this satirical take on sectarian divisions within Christianity.
Oh yeah, Screwtape's advice.
He writes about how the real fun is working of hatred between those who say Mass and those who say Holy Communion. when neither party could possibly state the difference in any form which would hold water for 5 minutes.
Ha! So sharp.
It really highlights how seemingly trivial theological or ritualistic differences can become grounds for animosity and division rather than fostering deeper understanding or unity. It demonstrates a deep-seated human propensity for tribalism, often masked by religious adherence.
Which speaks to a kind of dogmatism that actively resists true inquiry or reconciliation, often for, well, ego-driven reasons, perhaps.
It often seems that way.
And the conflict within Jainism between the Digamara sect and others over authoritative texts, that also points to this kind of internal religious disagreement, where even within a shared faith, interpretations can lead to fundamental divides.
Exactly. The Digamara sect's rejection of the compiled Abbas, believing the older Purvis to be the only true teachings, illustrates how even within a single religious tradition, foundational disagreements over authoritative texts can lead to significant division and dogmatism. It impacts collective understanding and practice, showing that the impulse to cling to a specific pure interpretation can create profound schisms.
And then there's the insidious role of the ego in all of this, isn't there? The idea that our own internal mechanisms can actually lead us to delusion and self-deception in the name of belief.
Both A Course in Miracles and Conversations with God touch on this powerfully. They suggest that the ego can hijack the spiritual impulse.
How so?
A Course in Miracles describes how the ego works, always to justify what goes against the truth, flies in the face of reason and makes no sense. Can this be justified? What can this be except an invitation to insanity, to save you from the truth?
Wow. An invitation to insanity.
It suggests this internal mechanism that can lead to profound delusion and self-deception, where belief is used not for enlightenment, but actually to avoid uncomfortable, often painful, truths about oneself or the world.
And Conversations with God directly connects this internal insanity to the justification of violence, which is a really scathing critique of how belief can be twisted.
A very pointed critique,
Yeah.
Challenging the self-righteousness often found in religious justifications for harm. Because you imagine someone has inflicted injury upon you, you feel it right and proper to inflict injury in return. That which you say is not okay for human beings to do to each other is okay for you to do, so long as you are justified. This is insanity.
That cuts deep.
It highlights how the ego's need for justification, often cloaked in religious piety, can twist fundamental moral principles, leading to cycles of violence under the guise of righteousness or divine mandate.
So, what does this all mean for our understanding of faith and its critics? It seems these sources illustrate how religion, like any powerful human system or ideology, can indeed be co-opted for harmful ends, or used to resist understanding and compassion.
The deep dive here isn't about condemning faith entirely, obviously, but it is about critically examining its real-world manifestations, both positive and negative, as a complex human phenomenon. It shows us that belief, when unchecked by critical self-reflection, genuine compassion, and an openness to truth, can indeed contribute to violence, ignorance, and profound suffering. And that's a point that critics of religion, like those who might align with the God delusion perspective, are keen to highlight. And frankly, they find ample evidence for it in human history. Okay, so if we connect this to the bigger picture, and especially after acknowledging those very real critiques and historical shadows, what positive, transformative aspects of spiritual and religious life do our sources reveal? What purpose does faith serve for those who embrace it, offering perhaps a counterbalance to that shadow side and leading to profound growth and meaning?
This is where we look at the incredible resilience and beauty of the human spirit, I think, and the constructive power of spiritual paths. After examining the challenges and the critiques, it feels vital to acknowledge the profound positive impact that spiritual paths have had and continue to have on individuals and societies. So, what do our sources say about cultivating inner peace and a deep connection both with ourselves and with the world around us?
Well, many sources point to a deep connection with nature and an experience of inner stillness as a primary path to peace and ethical living. Taoist meditation, for instance, as we mentioned, explicitly fosters harmony with the Tao and stillness by focusing on the breath. This isn't about rigid dogma, but about an experiential union with the natural order of the universe, a flowing with the rhythms of life that brings profound tranquility and a kind of spontaneous, unforced ethics.
I love how that connects to Robin Wall Kimmerer's work in Braiding Sweetgrass. She illustrates such a profoundly spiritual relationship with the natural world that feels both ancient and urgently relevant today.
Yes. Kimmerer beautifully illustrates how plants are integral to reweaving the connection between land and people. She describes how a place becomes a home when it sustains you in body as well as spirit. Her narratives weave ancient indigenous teachings into conversation naturally as comments on the weather, highlighting a wisdom tradition that sees spirit and matter braided together. It fosters a profound sense of belonging, reverence, and ecological peace.
It's beautiful writing.
It really is. And similarly, Henry David Thoreau, in Walden, finds this inexhaustible entertainment which the country offers. A deep, almost spiritual connection to nature that transforms his arduous labor into something deeply meaningful and fulfilling, leading to profound self-discovery.
So a deep connection to the natural world itself can be profoundly transformative, offering a wellspring of peace and meaning.
Absolutely.
And then there's the idea of transcending the ego and suffering to find that deeper, more enduring peace. That seems central too.
Eckhart Tolle, again, is central here. He speaks of accessing the dimension of space and cultivating freedom from ego as determining one's ability to enjoy life, to feel an inner connectedness. He argues that being truly present frees us from the ego's grip, allowing a deeper, more peaceful state of being to emerge.
Right, escaping the pain body.
Escaping the pain body, exactly. And Siddhartha's journey, in Hermann Hesse's novel, is a perfect literary example of this, isn't it? He gradually lets go of the world's bitterness and attachments, finds this deep love for this rushing water of the river.
A river as teacher.
And senses the river had something special to tell him, a metaphor for the flow of life and wisdom. And his friend Govinda eventually finds profound peace through Siddhartha's enlightened example, illustrating how one person's internal transformation can really illuminate the path for others.
It's about letting go, isn't it, fundamentally? Shedding the layers of self-centeredness and grasping that cause so much suffering.
Precisely. The cloud of unknowing describes the soul becoming humbled, softened, and purified, and grows so keen and delicate and pure that it can become one with the Spirit of God. This is a process of radical self-emptying, allowing for divine union. And C.S. Lewis, back in Mere Christianity, discusses how the natural life is inherently self-centered and often afraid of the spiritual world precisely because the spiritual world kills self-centeredness and self-will. These traditions often see suffering and discipline not just as things to be endured, but as actual means to transcend the ego and achieve a deeper, more profound, and truly selfless peace.
And at the core of so many of these transformative paths, in nearly every tradition we look at, we consistently find the central and often challenging concept of love.
Love is indeed presented as the core of being and the ultimate goal in so many sources. Erich Fromm, in The Art of Loving, defines true love not as sentimental fantasy or passive emotion, but as an active, engaged relationship that courageously breaks the wall of separateness between individuals.
It's an action, not just a feeling.
Exactly. An active practice of care, responsibility, respect, and knowledge. It demands effort and vulnerability.
Which Conversations with God takes to an even more expansive, almost cosmic level by identifying love as our very essence.
It does. It declares who you are as love. What love is unlimited, eternal, and free. It even contrasts traditional marriage, often viewed perhaps as a means of security, with the idea of it being an ultimate announcement of love, if it allowed for unlimited, eternal, and free expression of love. This suggests a divine nature of love that transcends societal constructs and human limitations, pointing to love as the fundamental force of existence.
And James Baldwin, again, in The Fire Next Time, he also uses love in such a profound, almost spiritual sense, doesn't he?
He does. Not merely in the personal sense, he writes, but as a state of being or a state of grace, not in the infantile American sense of being made happy, but in the tough and universal sense of quest and daring and growth.
Quest and daring and growth. I like that.
He suggests love is both desperately sought and cunningly avoided, precisely because it takes off the masks that we fear we cannot live without and know we cannot live within, revealing our authentic selves and fostering genuine connection.
That's a powerful point, that true love demands vulnerability, and that vulnerability, while maybe terrifying, is also absolutely essential for growth and connection, both with others and with a deeper sense of self, or maybe even the divine. So, moving from individual transformation, what about the constructive power of spiritual paths for community, meaning, and personal growth on a broader scale? How do they build us up rather than just, tear us down through division?
Well, the power of ritual and shared experience is a particularly significant aspect of this, I think. Joseph Campbell explains that a ritual is the enactment of a myth. By participating in a ritual, you are participating in a myth.
Bringing myth to life.
Exactly. He sees rituals like confirmation and bar mitzvah, even in their modern, maybe softened forms, as attempts at psychological transformation. Rites of passage that connect individuals to a larger narrative, a shared identity, and ancestral wisdom. These communal enactments provide a framework for meaning and belonging.
And Caspar Turcule in The Power of Ritual, he ties this to a very modern problem, doesn't he? The epidemic of loneliness and social isolation.
He does, very insightfully.
Yeah.
Linking social isolation to epidemics like addiction and violence, emphasizing how disconnection sours the sweet things in life. Rituals in this context, whether they're explicitly religious or more secular like shared meals, mindful walks, even things like book clubs, they provide vital avenues for connection and community. They address a fundamental human need for belonging and shared meaning that seems increasingly absent in modern society for many people.
Beyond ritual, spiritual paths often offer concrete guidance and support in navigating life's immense challenges, right? Providing a sense of direction when things feel chaotic or overwhelming.
Absolutely. The courage to create mentions the oracle at Delphi and its significant role in ancient Greek society. It provided assurance that behind the seeming chaos, there was knowledge and purpose. This points to that enduring human need for guidance and a sense of order in uncertain times.
We still seek that assurance today.
We do. And The Way of a Pilgrim, that classic of Russian spirituality, advises prayer when you are overcome with fear and anguish as the only antidote to all our griefs. It promises inexpressible bliss and joy from constant prayer. It highlights prayer as a profound source of inner strength, comfort, and direct spiritual experience for the practitioner. And Brené Brown's research, again, from The Gifts of Imperfection, highlights stories of people embracing imperfection and vulnerability, finding the inextricable connection between joy and gratitude, and how they ultimately learn to trust themselves. This underscores the role of self-acceptance, authenticity, and spiritual resilience in personal well-being, often fostered by journeys of faith or self-discovery.
And finally, these paths often offer a sense of grand purpose, don't they? Contributing to a larger spiritual evolution, which is an incredibly powerful motivator for many, providing a vision for humanity's potential.
This brings us to a truly grand vision of human potential in some sources. Teilhard de Chardin, the Jesuit paleontologist, in The Phenomenon of Man, views evolution as an ascent towards consciousness.
Consciousness itself evolving.
Yes, and that mankind contain the possibilities of the Earth's immense future and can realize more and more of them on condition that we increase our knowledge and our love. This frames spiritual development not as an escape from the world, but as integral to cosmic evolution itself, a path of collective advancement.
That's a big vision.
It is. And Ken Wilber's The Integral Vision describes integral life practice, a kind of holistic approach combining body, mind, and spirit as levels, and self, culture, and nature as quadrants, for comprehensive personal growth and spiritual evolution. It illustrates a structured pathway towards this broader development.
And Viktor Frankl's insight from Auschwitz, it really puts a fine point on the fundamental human need for meaning, doesn't it? Even in the most horrific circumstances imaginable.
Frankl's profound insight, the greatest task of humanity is to seek meaning in life, resonates so deeply, especially given his experiences. He saw having experienced as the most real form of life, suggesting that even in profound suffering, meaning can be found and embraced, and that gives life its ultimate purpose.
Finding meaning is key.
It seems to be. David Brooks in The Second Mountain notes that in moments of profound low, protective shells are taken off, humility is achieved, a problem is clearly presented, and a call to service is clearly received. This highlights how adversity and spiritual seeking can lead to profound personal transformation and a shift towards selfless service, a journey from individual ambition to communal contribution. And the Theologia Germanica further emphasizes this, advising giving oneself up to God and submitting, seeking and intending the glory and praise of God alone, and not seeking one's own personal benefit, which offers a path to genuine liberation from self-centeredness.
So if we connect all this together, these accounts highlight that for many, spiritual and religious traditions offer these profound frameworks for understanding existence, fostering community, navigating suffering, and achieving personal and collective transformation, connecting them to what Conversations with God calls a larger reality.
Exactly.
It's not just about what we might lose if we abandon faith, but also about what we stand to gain when we embrace its constructive power.
Precisely. They offer a powerful counterbalance to the critiques by demonstrating how faith, in its constructive and evolving forms, can provide deep meaning, moral guidance, and a pathway to inner peace and outward compassion. It enables individuals to not just endure, but often to thrive and contribute to something far greater than themselves, shaping not only their own lives, but potentially the fabric of society in profoundly positive ways.
Wow, what a journey we've taken today. Seriously. We've wrestled with some of humanity's most complex and, yeah, often contentious questions, particularly those brought right to the forefront by critical voices like Richard Dawkins.
It's been a lot to cover.
We've explored whether goodness requires a divine source, if faith is truly rational, and how belief has manifested in both incredibly inspiring and profoundly troubling ways throughout history. And our goal, as we said at the start, wasn't really to endorse or condemn any single view, but to use these critiques, these challenges, as a catalyst to gain a deeper, maybe more nuanced understanding of the multifaceted nature of these topics.
Yeah, and our deep dive has shown that morality can be seen as either divinely ordained or an intrinsic human capacity, with diverse traditions finding remarkable common ground in the importance of intention and conscious action. That was fascinating.
Right.
We've seen that rationality seems to extend beyond just linear logic, embracing intuition, feeling even profound mystical experiences as valid paths to truth, which really challenges the notion that intellectual thought is the sole arbiter of reality.
Definitely challenges that.
And while acknowledging the shadow side of belief, the historical justification of violence, the resistance to new understanding, the ego's role in self-deception, we also uncovered the immense constructive and transformative power of spiritual paths, their ability to cultivate inner peace, foster community, inspire profound purpose, and drive personal evolution towards greater knowledge and love.
So thinking about all this, what stands out to you listening right now? What resonates from this extensive exploration of goodness, reason, and belief? How do these various traditions, these critiques, and these profound insights perhaps challenge or affirm your own views, your own spiritual landscape? Maybe it's not about finding a single definitive answer in the end, but maybe about embracing the complexity, asking more profound questions, and just recognizing the incredibly rich tapestry of human experience and wisdom that we've touched on. As T.L.I. Desjardins once suggested, if the human spirit, like the natural world, requires an inexhaustible future and a taste for life to invent and construct, what then is the ultimate source of that impetus, that drive for discovery and meaning?
A deep question.
And how do we cultivate it in ourselves and our societies, whether we choose to call it faith or perhaps something else entirely?
Food for thought indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into some of life's biggest questions.
Until next time.